Hello, hello, everybody. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the show. I've got a good show filled in for you today. Particularly want to talk about the medieval era. Let's break down some of the historical aspects of what it is, and let's look at certain things that happened during the medieval ages. In particular, so when we speak about medieval era, we're generally talking about the Middle Ages in history that run between the Roman Empire and the Renaissance. So it's right smack dab in the middle. So that would be around 400 AD to 1400 AD. And so the word medieval comes from the Latin medium aevum, or Middle Ages. Now, a lot of people refer to this era as being the Dark Ages, and there's this myth that um, you have complete and utter blackout of information, and that there is nothing that it really contributes to society. Like, just knowledge goes dead. It's like, someone just flipped the light switch and we were filled with darkness and ignorance. And, you know, I don't even have to begin to tell you about the erroneous conceptions that, people have. It was the exact opposite. I assure you, it was the exact opposite. The Dark Ages, with the term for it or the word for it, was actually coined by those who are partial to like the classical period or the Renaissance eras, and to contrast what they thought was the ultimate in ages of enlightenment. They looked at the Middle Ages and said, "We're going to call these the dark times between these two rays of light." So it's a misconcept of the Middle Ages, of what happened during medieval era, and it really does it an injustice. So when we discuss the Middle Ages or medieval times, there's three distinct periods. The early period, which ranges from about 400 to 1000, then the high period, which is 1000 to 1300, and then the decline, which is between 1300 to 1450. Now, there was a lot going on during this time of literally 1,000 years here. Europe wasn't as closed off as what people may think of it being closed off. They had connections to Asia. They had connections to Arabia, which we'll go into discussion later on in the show. But uh, the they weren't as bordered up as a lot of people think. We have modern conceptions when it comes to countries, that there's a strict border and people can't cross that border without documentations and passports and stuff like that. Well, during this time, you see a lot of people from all walks of life moving in and out of areas, and there's just this constant travel. Granted, now a lot of your poor people never left 20 miles from where they grew up, because that's a day's journey. Um, but your merchants and professional transportation people, they were everywhere. And if you go back and actually look at your genealogy, uh, I do amateur genealogy, and I've been looking into my genealogy, and there is, if you do like your DNA testing, you will see breakdowns in your ethnicities, and some of them will just downright shock you. Like, how did these differing groups of people meet and come together? So um, there was a lot of uh, back and forth between areas, and a lot of travel. So it wasn't roped off, it wasn't closed off, it wasn't like this dystopian uh, period of being. It was far from that. And so the main focus of the channel is obviously dealing with chivalry, warrior ethos, and we can't not discuss certain things in the medieval ages, and one of those I want to talk about is the effect of the Great Steppe area. This is your modern day area, Hungary, um, Poland, Slavia, all those like eastern, but southern and eastern areas of Europe that butt up with Asia, which is commonly called like the Eurasian area. This was a very interesting area. There's a lot of trading that went on through here, and a lot of invasions as well. The Huns. You look at Attila the Hun, who was Hungarian. They were very instrumental in a lot of aspects of medieval culture. Uh, they were the most feared group of nomadic warriors during the time. Uh, so, and they developed a different tactic using horses to for speed, and which allowed them to be faster than your standard infantry walking units. And they had a recurve bow. This is the first time that recurved bows began to be seen out on the battlefront as a primary weapon, and it had an increased range. And we won't see anything technologically more advanced in the recurve until we get to the use of the longbow. But this recurve bow allowed them to shoot fast, shoot accurate, and shoot farther than your average bow. Now they were savage, 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 and that when you read like a lot of the uh, older historical documents of the time, you can just they people held the Huns with just this disgust, utter disgust. Um, but they were very strong for being loosely not affiliated with any certain area. They just wherever they were at, that's where they were, kind of deal. They toppled China, they toppled India, and the Goths. Now, the Goths were split east and west, so you had the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths, um, and it was during the time where they started invading the lands of the Goths, which was there in the German region of Europe. They the Goths were essentially kicked out of their own land, and they received permission from Emperor Valens, the Roman Emperor Valens, to cross into the Roman Empire. But the Romans at the time held them at pretty low regard, and they began to mistreat them, and this caused uprisings, and the Goths fought back. This kind of led to a quasi war between the Romans and the Goths, and the Roman infantry were actually defeated by Gothic horsemen. From then on, these uh, the Romans would actually use these horsemen as an elite unit to fight as paid mercenaries on the side of Rome, and this would become the root of having a combined mounted warrior and infantry units. And this comes from the Battle of Adrianople. Um, this is about 410. You can see where the Huns started sacking Rome. They made federates, and they were granted. I'm talking about the Goths. I'm sorry. The Goths were actually granted the freedom to roam around the empire and to fight for Rome. Now, Attila the Hun started prepping for his attack on Rome. And at the time, Pope Leo confronts them, and he tells them to leave. And, a lot of people attribute it to very different things. But we all know that, God works in mysterious ways, and we can't negate his uh, will in the way situations occur. And so Attila the Hun actually goes and leaves Rome, and he had problems of his own to deal with back in his homeland. But like I said, things happen for a reason. Uh, this activity here left an indelible mark on Europe, and you start to see a rise in the Germanic tribes, especially in Western Europe. But the biggest thing that happened during the medieval era is trade, and not just trade in general, but luxury trade items. And the demand for these luxury trade items causes routes to be opened up. And now these routes uh, are featuring, the Silk Road that goes to China and back. You have uh, the route to the Indian Ocean, which featured spices that came out of India. Um, Axum of Africa, Ethiopia, comes into the picture, and they start to trade incense. They have special trees there, and uh, they're able to produce large quantities of incense. Um, then you have the North African trade routes from Morocco to Mali. And this was essential in both gold, ivory, and salt. And salt was worth its weight in gold. And so that's kind of more or less where you get that terminology from. Uh, but the trading of salt for gold in Africa was extremely important. These places had to have salt to feed their livestock, to even to feed themselves as well, and so salt became a very important commodity. And so the great thing about all these trade routes being established is now you have the ability to spread ideas. Uh, and so you have this exchange of ideas that take place that kind of meshes with different societies altogether. So you have this knowledge from the classical periods that you're able to pass off and talk about things and get other people who might not have heard certain things now they're hearing these new things. So it did help lead to the spread of Christianity, as well as it led to a rise in Islam. Now, we can't talk about the Middle Ages or medieval era without talking about Islam. So Islam, which the progenitor of that, Muhammad, created it out of several injustices that he witnessed among his people. He was a Berber, or I'm sorry, a Bedouin, um, which were nomadic travelers and merchants in Arabia. And supposedly he received visions from Gabriel, and Gabriel told him to write what he heard down in a book. And I think this went on for several years or so. And so, yeah, needless to say, he created this new religion, and it just added more divisions into the medieval Mediterranean world. Uh, you begin to see a rise in armies of Muslims that move in on Western Europe, and they become the new threat to Europe. So they're able to exploit the caravan routes in Arabia, especially the Axum, where they go across the Red Sea into Mecca, and from Mecca to Jerusalem to Aleppo and into Persia. These routes just allow for the spread of this uh, new religion to become it's like a vector. And so you have two different kind of cultures in Arabia. You've got your city dwellers, but then you have your Bedouins, which are the nomads, and they focus heavily on family and clan system and loyalty to the family and to the clan system. And at the time, they were pagans. Um, there was a black meteor that fell in the desert called the Kaaba, and they worshipped around this uh, meteor. Now, in modern times, we can see that same thing, uh, which was moved to Mecca, and they retained this worship of this meteor, uh, and kind of meshed it in with Islam. Uh, the Bedouins were caravan merchants. So they had caravans of camels, and they were leading them through the desert, and moving goods back and forth. Um, so, like I said, Muhammad was a Bedouin, and he would have had contact with both Jews and Christians along the routes, doing trades, dealing with merchants, and supposedly he was inspired because of the conflicts between Jews and Christians as it comes to theology. Of course, we're going to have differing views. Um, that's kind of why I hate when people refer to us as a culture of being Judeo-Christian, um, because their Judaism and Christianity are not necessarily at odds with one another, but Christianity is the fulfillment of Judaism to the point where obviously we no longer need the Mosaic law and things like that, um, because we're filled with Christ's law, which brings the Mosaic law to the up to a certain degree and says, okay, well, yeah, this still applies, but guess what? I'm going to change it to where you're going to do this without even thinking about the law, It's going to become in your nature, and it's going to surpass the Mosaic law. And so uh, Jews have different views on a lot of things that we as Christians consider, wrong, immoral, sinful. So it's uh, so he saw this division and these conflicts, and he openly criticized both Jews and Christians for this, and so supposedly that's why he created Islam, was to be get like a happy medium. But we all know the story of Jonah and what the Lord said about the difference between hot and cold water, as well as lukewarm water. Um, so because of the caravan trails and all this activity that was happening in Arabia, he was able to not only unite Arabs but transport this idea uh, more readily. And so we began to see invasions into North Africa. They take over Egypt. Um, then they shoot for Jerusalem and the Byzantine Empire around about between 632 and 661. They conquer India and they move in on Persia and actually take down Persia. These Bedouin groups were unified by Islam, and they used the trades, uh, the merchandise, and the trade routes, both militarily and religiously. And then we know that, or we can see at the point when they invaded Europe was 711 AD. 711 AD. This small raiding party came from North Africa. They stopped at, or they were led by Tariq, uh, which is they stopped at the in the Straits of Gibraltar, at the Rock of Gibraltar, and actually that's where the location of Gibraltar gets his name from Tariq, and they invade Spain and they lay waste to Spain and they keep going north and keep going north. And the biggest reason why they were so successful. Now, granted, this was just supposed to be a surveillance mission, and Tariq was overzealous and he took advantage of the fact that the Visigoths, who controlled Spain during that time, were very decentralized, and they were almost regionalized, where you had like town states, and they were ultra competitive with one another, and they just had no unity. Uh, from so they at 732 A.D. They make their way towards France, and this is the Merovingian dynasty that are in control of France during the time. Notably, Charles Martel, the Hammer. He met them at Poitiers, and make a long story short, the Muslims lost. They retreated, and they never, ever, ever attempted to advance north again after that. And so it is thanks to Charles Martel that um, an end was put at that moment. Now, he saw that and he said something has to change. And so the feudal system was born. The Carolingians had lots of land, but they weren't money rich. They were land rich, but not money rich. So a system was devised in where um, people who would give loyal service were also in thanks for that was giving land, and that land they could do whatever they want to with it. Most of them farmed it and had able to gain wealth that way. And this began the lord and vassal relationship uh, hallmarked by the feudal system, where these vassals would receive a fiefdom, which is the root word of feudal, and they were given these land grants, and from this they were able to raise armies of noble these noblemen who were loyal to the crown, and so the army begins to develop, where these nobles are on horseback, and they start to develop their armor, um, and technology is just coming up to the foreground here, where they have continual advances in not just armor, but a new saddle and new stirrups. And these stirrups and saddle combination would actually allow the rider to use the power of the horse to generate this stopping power with his lance. So he's able to harness, no pun intended, the horsepower, again, no pun intended, and really deliver a heck of a wallop. And so a new style of fighting is developed. Previously, like when you look at the Huns, they used their horses, or actually, before that, the armies used their horses to get to a battlefield really quick. They would dismount and engage in dismounted combat, um, or they would use their horses with bows, like you see the Huns. Um, till now, you had the breeding of bigger horses, of actual what they called war horses, which would be like our modern day Clydesdale horse, the Budweiser horses, and even the horses began to wear armor. So you have this uh, tank, so to speak, now on the battlefield, mowing down infantrymen, and it was very very scary. I mean, you hear talk about how the ground just shook when these cavalry units would take off on their charges. And so, they were charging right into the battle head first, with their lances and swords. And they were very formidable and expensive. And so you began to see where, especially there in France, they began to field massive uh, amounts of mounted armies. Um, so then you move forward a little bit, and what I want to talk about next is around about the ninth century. Europe, well, you start to see this division during the Middle Ages, where these regions are being divided up. And so you have Northern and Western Europe. So they feature kingdoms. They're mostly Catholic. They're either Latin or German language speakers. And then you have the East, which consists of the Byzantine Empire, who during this time became very, very weak. They were Greek Orthodox, what we would refer to today as Greek Orthodox, and their language was based on Greek. And then you had Islam, which ran from Spain all the way down and across back to India. And although the languages were diverse, the official governmental language was Arabic, and even the religious language also was Arabic. this was a magnificent time period here. You have not just the rebuilding of empires, but the building of empires. Um, you take a look at Christmas in the year 800 AD. Charlemagne was dispatched to Rome. Charlemagne, that we know Charles the Great, Charlemagne. He had a system of where he went to each and every one of his territories, and he personally made sure that everything was up to snuff. Now, he was in Rome, went to Rome to save Pope Leo because Pope Leo was being attacked, and they were trying to assassinate him at some point, and Pope Leo there in front of everyone and uh, declared Charlemagne as emperor of Rome, and put a crown on his head, crowned him, and Charlemagne was, according to his personal historian, was taken aback and was reluctant to actually be crowned or be deemed as emperor. Um, but I kind of think that was just more so ancient propaganda, because uh, I just don't see him being as alpha as he is. As I mean, it's not. I'm not saying that he wasn't humble about it, but you had to do that. So it's not that he genuinely wasn't humble. I'm not saying that. He was very humble, but he wanted it just as much as anybody would want it. Um, so I mean, you have to look at his humanity in it as well. But so anyway, yeah, Charlemagne was awesome, 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 and he is actually like my 30th something umpteenth great grandfather. Um, but he conquered large areas of Europe. I mean to tell you, and so he was uh, creating centralized government, which is what they needed. And he began to restore knowledge. I mean, his whole deal with books and libraries and retaining all this knowledge and having stuff translated. It started with Charlemagne. Charlemagne was just, yeah, yeah. Renaissance has nothing compared on on the level for the time, on the level that Charlemagne was involved in the restoration of knowledge. It was very expensive to create uh, books and literature during that time. They used vellum, which was animal skins, and it was actually the Arabs who invented paper around about this time in the Middle Ages, and but it hadn't become quite popular just yet in Europe. Things were still done on vellum scrolls. And he promoted Christianity. I mean, he promoted Christianity, and it's thanks to him that we do have a larger swaths of people during that time who were Christian. Now this created a lot of tensions with the Byzantine Empire. Um, after he was declared emperor of the Roman Empire, because the Byzantines still considered themselves as being the Holy Roman Emperor, the Roman Emperor during that time, and so Charlemagne, in his humility, settled and negotiated and settled for the title of the Emperor of the Franks, and he sought other allies. And during this time, he went to Arabia, or he personally did not go, but he sent envoys to Arabia and to Africa, and he set up a sort of commerce back and forth with the Abbasid dynasty. Now, his death and after his death really rocked the European scene. And you had wars that broke out uh, between his three grandsons. Each of them were vying for power and trying to be the ultimate king of the Franks. But Charlemagne had divided. Well, actually, so after they warred with one another, they came to an agreement with the Treaty of Verdun, and so they split the kingdom up in threes. And Charles the Bold got France. The Bald, I'm sorry, Charles the Bald. He got France. Louis the German, as he was known, got East Francia, and Lothar the First controlled Italy, and the strip that's north in between in the strip in between the other two brothers of his that included Alsace and Lorraine, Alsace-Lorraine, and so I mean, that same area of Alsace and Lorraine was contested even all the way up to World War One. In fact, someone would argue that's why they were came up with that word to begin with. It was that contested region. It's been like a hotly contested thing there. So, and it was the German section that took on the title of the Holy Roman Empire up until about 1806 when Napoleon came through. And that's where you get the start of the Teutons, the Teutonic orders, um, and this uh, German centric uh, coming to the forefront there. And so yeah, now uh, let me let me talk a little bit about the Crusades. I mean, you can't be talking about the Middle Ages and leave out the Crusades. That's the biggest event that everybody kind of focuses in on is the Crusades. And of course, when your channel talks about chivalry and knighthood and stuff like that, we see that the Crusades, in certain areas, was the epitome of knighthood, but knighthood still had a long way to go to perfect itself. Um, so, okay, we're looking at the time period of 1097 to 1291, and there was a total of uh, 8 crusades, total of 8 crusades that span that time frame there. So we start in about 1095, and this is again a response to the Muslims having invaded Jerusalem and taking Jerusalem and the Holy Mound, and Pope Urban II began to give a call to action to all Christians. He came right on out and said, "Hey guys, we need to start to implement this holy war, and we need to free Jerusalem from the Muslims." And the rest we know is history. Okay, yeah, no, I can't just end it there, now can I? Obviously not. So, in his speech, he also calls out those noblemen who are robber barons, as we know them, uh, who just went around and looted, raided, robbed, raped, destroyed villages. Uh, he called on them to become knights and to instill themselves with Christian virtues. And he said to the people who are rabble rousers and fighters, he says, "It's time for you to become warriors of Christ." And he told them, wear a cross on your chest when you're on your way, so that we know, who you are, and then on your back when you return home. And so this idea of being marked by the cross was called crusaded. Crux from cross. So they were crusaded or marked with a cross. So that's where we get this term uh, crusades from, because these warriors who were marked by the cross were called crusaders. Um, and so they had a series of engagements that lasted, over the 200 years there. 1071 is kind of like the prefiguring of this here, when the Byzantine Empire actually lost at Manzikert against the Turks, and this kind of sets this whole wheel in motion. Um, and so the the whole motivation to go to war was not just a religious one, but you had to look at the financial aspects too. You get a lot of second sons who go, and they're promised lands, they're promised riches, they're promised, the forgiveness of their sins in the acts of fighting for God. And so you had a lot of second sons who volunteered and went, just on the prospect of them able to getting riches, things that they wouldn't have been able to do in Europe, because during time these noble houses or these noble families were the titles and the properties and all the good stuff passed to the firstborn son. On the death of the firstborn son, if he had no heirs, then it fall back to the next son in line. So these sons really didn't stand a chance to inherit anything, and so they wanted to go out and make their own way. Um, which reminds me of the old song from Dukes of Hazzard, telling my age here. Is making their way the only way they know how. All right, yeah, I won't quit my day job. I won't take up singing, so don't hurt me too much in the comments on that one. If you made it this far, hey, at least you're being entertained, right? Okay. So the first crusade was what was known as the Peasants' Crusade, and these guys were just a bunch of ragtag, under-equipped, didn't really know what they were doing. They were just, answering the call. They had, this humility enough about them to answer the call, and hey, they were looking to make a little bit of cash too. Why not? Who wouldn't? uh, and it just, yeah, yeah. I mean, wow, yeah. So we got 1096. Where it just it was bad. It was bad. They were getting it really handed to them, right? And so by 1096, the nobles and the knights, they finally show up and they arrive, and they actually surprise the Turks. They overwhelm them. They defeat them, and they drive them out of Jerusalem, and so that you start to have now the setting up of kingdoms in the area of not just Jerusalem, but all along uh, the Dead Sea area. Shooting straight up north. And this was called the Outremer, uh, and it consisted of the county of Edessa, the principality of Antioch, the county of Tripoli, and the kingdom of Jerusalem. Then you start to see the most famous of these knights taking shape, and so you get they're calling for like these warrior monks, because monks wanted to go. They really, really, really wanted to go, and they had that fervor that monks have, and but see, the thing with them being monks is they couldn't kill, they couldn't shed blood. So the idea was we need a way to have a warrior monk, and so you have the beginnings of the Templars and the Hospitallers, however you want to call them, and they really become the tip of the spear for not just knights, but for all sorts of military action, and they become the special forces for their time, so to speak. Now, in a parallel situation, we have Muslims are calling for a jihad or for a holy war. This leads up to the Second Crusade, where Pope Eugenius III calls for this other crusade. It's about 1144, and it's after Edessa falls. So, and this one is called the Kingly Crusade, where now the kings of Europe are starting to get involved. You have Louis VII of France, you have Conrad III of Germany, and you even have Eleanor of Aquitaine, which is like a 20 something or other grandmother of mine. And it just is a disaster. It's a disaster from the start. They can't develop a clear plan. They can't get along. They don't want to work together. There's like too many chiefs and not enough Indians kind of situation, and so it's a very unsuccessful siege of the walls of, or the city of Edessa there, and by 1149 they go ahead and call the thing off, and everybody comes back home. It's just that was it. They couldn't do anything else with it. Uh, and so we fast forward till about 1187, and this is when Jerusalem is being seized again. This time by Saladin. And if you look back and see exactly how effective he was as a military leader, he's very admirable as a military leader and as a warrior. And some people would say, well, wait a minute, this is the enemy. This is Muslims. You're talking about. Yeah. There's that, but when warriors face up against one another, there's always a level of respect and a bit of admiration. We can see the same thing happen after World War II when you have uh, Japanese uh, servicemen that make acquaintances with uh, American uh, soldiers and Marines and sailors, and they have this respect for the way they conducted themselves in combat, and so that's nothing really new. That's kind of that's warrior culture there. Uh, but they begin to get into negotiations, and uh, Christians actually just pick up and leave Jerusalem. And so, because of this, a third crusade is called to order, and the new Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa gets involved. Richard Plantagenet the Lionheart gets involved, who is a 20 something or other uncle of mine. Uh, and then Philip II of France also gets involved. And bad things happen from the start. I mean, Frederick, Emperor Frederick, he drowns. And so his army, they just pick up and go home. They just leave. And Philip has these really bad losses, and he retreats and leaves Richard there in the midst of everything to negotiate with Saladin. And so negotiations were met, and the Muslims keep control of Jerusalem. The Christians are granted safe passage out and through Jerusalem, and they also are able to visit the Holy Sepulchre, and they're able to engage in free trade. Now, the idea of this did not bode well with many Christians, and so you have a new crusade being called in 1198 by Pope Innocent III. So the Crusaders left this time by sea route from Venice. They had Venetian ships, and so they take off on 1198, or actually, I'm sorry. They once they travel to Venice and they get organized and get all their materials and stuff. It's like 1202 AD, not AM or PM. Uh, so they finally leave, and along the way they decide that they're gonna attack Zara, which is a little town for Venice. They say, "Hey, we appreciate you guys giving us a lift. Let's go knock these out right quick." And so they go over and they bust a few skulls in Zara. The whole army's excommunicated. The Pope just says, "No, that you guys weren't supposed to do that. Zara's a Christian country, or a Christian town. I never gave you guys permission to do this. Why are you doing this? You guys are out of here." And so what do? They go and besiege Constantinople. And they never ever went to Jerusalem. Instead, and they take Constantinople. So then the next crusade is the Children's Crusade, 1212, and there's a call for pure, innocent soldiers. And so people start saying to themselves, "Well, who's more innocent? Who's the more innocent than children?" And so they began to recruit children from the ages of 7 to 14 years of age. Needless to say, they never made it to Jerusalem, and a lot of them were unfortunately sold into slavery, or they starved to death. So then that brings us up to 1217. Pope Honorius III. Egypt's attacked, and so these guys, they land on the Nile, and they get bogged down by the geography. It's very muddy, marshland, and they get stuck in the mud, pun intended. And after no success, they're not able to move anywhere. They just pick up and go back home. So uh, we get to around about 1228, and Frederick was still excommunicated during the time. He married the heiress of Jerusalem, Isabella II, and so he decides. The Pope's been after him for a long time. "Hey, look, man, I need you to get in the game. Get your head into this, man. Look, you're a warrior of Christ. What are you doing over here, man? What are you doing over here?" He stops, busting his chops over here, and Frederick goes, "You know what? I need to go over there anyway because I gotta claim my throne. That's my kingdom. I gotta go take it back." And so it becomes a time when he's ready to go on crusades, and boom, he goes over there, and he is able to negotiate a peace deal, and he got it brokered to where he was able to receive through his kingship Jerusalem, Nazareth, and Bethlehem. And the Muslims, they struck a deal, and the Muslims were able to keep the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And so the catch was Jerusalem had to remain unfortified, and it had to be free to all. So free passage for everybody to come in and worship wherever, however they wanted, without regard for religion. And he was crowned, and then he returns back to Europe. So, and then you start to see after this the rise of the Persian Turks, and it is through them that they began to invade the Holy Land. Once again, they took up jihad, and these guys are just brutal. They begin massacring and butchering priests. They desecrated the kingdom of Jerusalem. They actually go in and desecrate and dig up the kings of Jerusalem's tombs, and they just start to lay waste. And the patriarch of Jerusalem at the time, he sends the message out calling for help. And Louis the Ninth, our blessed Louis the Ninth, Saint Louis, he responds and he takes up arms and he mounts two different crusades. Now, Louis himself was a very, very holy king, and he is my first cousin, 25 times removed. Genealogy is interesting. But so time is 1248 AD, and this is the Seventh Crusade. He lands in Egypt again here, and he is defeated by the Turkish Sultan, and he has no choice but to return to France failed. And so he goes back to France and he bides his time, and now it's 1270. So from 1248 now to 1270. The eighth and last crusade is mounted by King Louis, Saint King Louis the Ninth. And this time he says, okay, well, I'm not going to go that same route again. I'm going to go through Tunisia. He lands in Tunisia and he treks all the way up from the west all the way to Egypt. And bless him, he died trying to take Tunis, and they failed. It was an utter failure. And after his death, and after them not able to make any leeway, they abandoned the attempt and they returned back to France. So the close of the Crusade era, we attribute it to 1291, and it's during this time, there were some little battles that were taking place, and it's constantly tossing back and forward. But by 1291, we start to see a close in the Crusade era. There's less Christian presence. There's no new knights coming aboard to fight, and so the Muslims seize Acre, which is the last outpost of Outremer, and it falls. It falls. Acre falls, and with the falling of Acre, and the Battle of Hattin before that, it's just there's just a bad taste in everyone's mouth for not just combat, but for the whole thing. So it just that it brings it to an end. That's it. So yeah, that was about the height, uh, roundabout of where the medieval ages take place. But so I want to talk also before I close here, and this is the last little bit in response to this deal about the medieval ages being this dark period. I want to talk about the literature of the time, and I want to focus here on this warrior literature. I mean, you had a lot of combat and wars and battles and all this being fought, and so naturally you should very well have this warrior literature, and there's very famous ones that we should all know. So to start off, Beowulf. I know I read Beowulf in high school as well as in college, and but it was one of the first biggest works of literature from the medieval era, and so that was about the Scandinavian tales of monsters or of a monster, and it took place it was written in England in 7th century using Old English, and so it's an important work because it reinsures the people who were the Danes at the time, the Vikings, Danish Vikings, of which I'm descended of. Uh, that it shows them back to their past, kind of reassures them of that, shows them the history of their peoples. Um, then you have a very interesting work of art called The Song of Roland, or Les Chansons de Roland. Les Chansons de Roland. It's a chanson or a song de geste, chanson de geste. And you have this whole theme of literature, these chansons de geste, which were like songs of deeds, these deeds of old, uh, heroes that were to inspire these new and up and coming boys that would become men, would become warriors, and it was always centered around the great deeds of knights and of warriors. This renown um, that we will hear a lot about when you start to study chivalry. Um, and so it takes place with Charlemagne. Uh, he left Spain after fighting the Muslims, and they have the whole train of warriors out, and Roland is the rear guard, so he's in charge of not just warning everyone that enemies are coming, but by trying to engage uh, in these enemies, and he's carrying this trumpet, and he's supposed to blow this trumpet anytime that he is about to collapse. His people are about to be overrun, um, and so they're ambushed by these Muslims, and because of his pride and his loyalty, um, he doesn't want Charlemagne to return and be killed by these Muslims, be ambushed by these Muslims for trying to come and rescue him. So he gives his life for his king in this service, this noble service, and he's killed or he's mortally wounded, and in the pains of dying, he blows the horn, and Charlemagne hears and he returns. Uh, but the Muslims are starting to retreat, and Charlemagne is just grieved and moved and brought to tears by the fact that his trusted warrior, his trusted knight, his right hand man has been killed, and he takes this vengeance about him, and they go and they destroy and rout the Muslims again, and so it's this last heroic stand to the last, uh, you know, um, kind of story that uh, is written. Very beautiful, very beautiful. I've read it. Very beautiful. Um, then you have the poem of El Cid. Cid from the Arabic Sidi, or chief, or like leader. Um, took place in Spain, and this was around about the time where they're starting to work on doing the Reconquest, and Reconquest is just this massive, massive, massive time frame uh, in Spain, um, and so it's about this nobleman called Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar, and he is like the perfect vassal. And the king during the time is Alfonso the Sixth, and so he takes part in a lot of fighting um, against the Muslims in this reconquest, and he is in charge of the area of Valencia, and so it shows this work of art shows the different battles, the intensity of the battles, and but it also focuses on the Cid's responsibility to his family, and to gaining wealth, and taking care of his family, and marrying off his daughters to good prospects. Um, and so it's a very interesting work. I've read it both I read it in Spanish first, and then I read the English translation. uh, but very, very, very good, very, very, very good work of art. And if you haven't seen the movie, the old movie with Charlton Heston in it, oh wow, that's a good movie as well. Very, 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 very good movie. But yeah, so you see these works that are focus on the recounting of bravery in battle, this time spent in the company of the warriors, fellow warriors, and lords and kings, and the companionship they shared, and the support of followers, and this grief at the loss of your comrades, and the belonging to a larger, greater group as a whole, like tribe, family, nation. You see that there is a shift in medieval literature, where they start to steer, not completely away, but they start to steer away, in this other kind of literature takes shape, and it's romance literature, and the courtly love literature about courtly love, and it's a very, very, very sketchy kind of work of art. Definitely not Christian, and definitely not knightly at all. And so it has a lot of criticisms, rightly so, because it's uh, it's not what, as some of your most renowned uh, knights of the area that wrote about knighthood, they actually talk in disdain about this whole style of literature. Geoffrey de Charny is one of them. Um, but so it features the hallmark of a noble love that's inspired by women, and patrons, and they become patrons of poems and songs, and so these things become focused on that noble lover, where he had to do everything that his beloved required him to do to show love, sometimes without even seeing the woman. And so he had to perform all these great deeds in the name of a lady. And it created a way that noble women could control these flattering knights in a so-called game of love. And so we see how that's very contrary to the Christian ideal of a warrior, what a warrior should be. And so uh, it was mainly centered around women who ruled the castles whenever the husbands were away fighting wars. These women would rule the castle, and they would have affairs with quote unquote obedient knights, knights that stayed behind, and uh, so it supposedly, lets women exalt themselves in their nobility. Kind of, I think, is a reverse way of looking at it. I don't see how that action can be the action of a noblewoman, or one that would claim themselves to be a Christian and a noble. That's like reverse engineering the whole thing. So anyway, so you have this very twisted view of love, and there is this idea that the man needs to fight for a lady, and that this gives him an elevation uh, in the character of his fight, and it ennobles the fighter. It makes him stronger, and it kind of is, in my opinion, usurping the whole idea of knighthood, chivalry, and fighting, or actually, of a Christian warrior fighting, for the innocent, to uphold justice and righteousness, and it's completely at odds. And the most popular work during this time, and I've read it. There's many different stories centered around it, but it's the very famous King Arthur and the adventures of his Knights of the Round Table. You have the whole. There's I don't know. There's maybe 7, 8, 9, possibly even 10 different kind of poems, or stories that are centered around this King Arthur character, who is an amalgamation of kings, and it was written by Chrétien de Tours, de Troyes. I'm sorry, forgot my French here. Um, and again, like I said, I mean, everybody knows there. Well, everybody I would think would know it, but I have to touch on it a little bit here. Um, so it centers around adventures of King Arthur and his knights of the Round Table, where everybody sits at a round table because they're all equal. They're all brothers. There's this brotherhood, this fraternity. Um, but it also talks about not just the adventures of these knights, but it talks about uh, courtly love, and through this courtly love, you have the adulterous act of Lancelot and Guinevere, and then ultimately there's this search for the Holy Grail, and it's through these works that you have all these conspiracy theories about how the Holy Grail is supposedly the genealogical offspring of Jesus, and you get all these other stuff that's like, okay, buddy, yeah, that's not it. No, no, that's not it. See, the search for the Holy Grail is a metaphor. It's a metaphor for the Eucharist, the sacrifice of the Mass, being at Mass itself, um, and being in a state of grace and being able to receive, the body, blood, soul, and divinity, which is the Eucharist. That's what the search of the Holy Grail is. It's a religious uh, euphemism or metaphor for the very act of being in a state of grace and able to receive communion. Uh, so then another famous work is uh, the tragedy of Tristan and Isolde, and so that takes place in Cornwall. The king of Isolde is the king of Cornwall's wife, and Tristan is sent there, and he falls in love with Isolde. He drinks some kind of love potion, and accidentally, I think, is what the storyline. It's been a long time since I read it, but so he falls in love and runs off and kidnaps Isolde, and they have an adulterous affair. Um, so yeah, it's it's not exactly what the knights of the period would have promoted. Certainly not. And so I just wanted to mention that. And even a noble woman herself, Christine of Pisan, wrote about this kind of thing and spoke out about this kind of literature involving courtly love. And she openly criticized uh, the adulterousness of courtly love, and she advocated married life, and she wrote a series of letters in response to a work of art, The Romance of the Rose. Um, she wrote a book or a series of letters that were later put into a book called The Debate of the Romance of the Rose. And she says that the Romance of Rose actually portrays women as nothing more than horrors, and the idea that they will always be, and is just really bad for women, and rightly so. It's really bad for women. And she declared that a satisfying family life was preferred, bar none, to anything in relation to this medieval game of love that was portrayed in this romance literature. So there you have it. There you have it with this episode. I hope it was very interesting. I hope you have a new insight now on the medieval era, how that it was not and nowhere near in the age of darkness. There was strides in technology. There was strides in military history. There was strides in literature uh, and in knowledge. I mean, like I said about Charlemagne and his amassing of knowledge and translation of very, 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 very interesting, very enlightened era, and it certainly is often mis or misread, misoverlooked, and given a bad light. And it has to be hands down a very popular era still. It's my favorite era to look into. Obviously, I mean, if you're in this channel, it might as well be yours too. I don't know. If, just to me, it's very exciting. It's. I've always been interested in this time period, and I did a lot of my uh, reading and research on this period. Obviously, centered around the warrior culture, knights, chivalry, things like that. So, which is the basis of what this channel is talks about. So obviously this is kind of right up my alley, and I hope it's up your alley too. I hope you guys and girls uh, enjoy this material. I don't want to leave the females out. You guys or you gals are warriors too, so don't forget that. A lot of times in this modern area, we think of women as being, as these prissy, un tactical, people, but that wasn't the case back in the day. Look at Viking women. Viking women fought. You had these queen or these noble women and queens who were in charge of these castles, and they had to hold off sieges. When's the perfect time for your enemy attack? When the husband's away fighting wars. So this is very much for you ladies. as it is for us men. And you know, Boudica, Bodisha, however you want to say her name, she's another prime example of a uh, formidable female warrior. So again, ladies, this channel is just as much for you as it is for the men out there. There's alpha females, there's alpha males, there's alpha females. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Um, us alpha males need a challenge, yeah. Anyway, so but yeah, all right. I'm gonna end it there. I'm not gonna take any more of your time. This was a pretty long show. I thank you guys for sticking with me all the way to the end. If you've made it to the end, comment down in the comments below if you made it to the end, and just simply write something like uh, I don't know. What can we write? What can we tell them to put down in the end? Uh, put down at the end, medieval era rocks. How about that? Medieval era rocks, because the medieval era really does rock, man. I mean, it's like it's an awesome time period. Okay, all right. So yeah, you guys are gonna keep me going on and on and on and on. And hey, if you guys and gals are enjoying this, please hit me up in the comment section. Please subscribe. Please let me know what you think. Again, it's kind of touch and go here when as I put stuff up. I'm kind of being led to being inspired by things, and this is I don't really like to do them this long, but hey, it is what it is. I got on a roll. I'm sorry, but okay. So yeah, guys, like, share, subscribe, and hit that bell on the video page, and that way you'll be able to get notifications for the next time I put out a new video, or any kind of video. And so, yep, here we are. Saint Michael, defend us in battle, and Saint Louis the Ninth, pray for us.